here, and I'm back with another video for Ophelia Talks. And today I'm going to explain a technique to you. So in one of the previous videos we made a cardigan, and those sleeves of that cardigan we tapered. And the tapering works really well, and it's really gentle, so you hardly see that you are actually losing one cluster every 3 rows, and it makes it so nice, and it's such a lovely technique to have up your sleeve. So I thought I would do a dedicated video to that, because of course in the cardigan video there was a lot of techniques in there. So this was the cardigan that we made, and as you can see, variegated yarn. So this time I am going to use just a plain yarn, just so that you can see clearly what I am doing. Also, I'm using 3 different colors for the 3 different rows that we will be doing to do the tapering. I am using a 5mm with a Aran yarn. I'm just using this as an example. You know, this technique can be used with whatever yarn you are using, as long as you have to reduce your number of clusters in a row, okay? But for me now, it's just handy and better to show you with an Aran yarn with nice big stitches and nice clear colors. You will also need a stitch marker, because to get started you have to make sure that whatever width you are working with is an even number of clusters, because we are going to have to divide this row into 2. So I have 14 clusters here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then in the middle here, this is where I'm going to put my stitch marker. So this stitch marker is now placed in the middle of 2 clusters, because of course in this following row we are going to be placing our clusters there. Okay, so for making a sleeve, of course you are just going to be working on one side to reduce the number of clusters like we are doing here. It is always easier, certainly for a sleeve, to be able to work flat, so doing rows and not going round, because when you're going round you will have to try and work out again where the middle is, where you're going to start. Well, yes, I mean, if you can do that, fair enough, but this is just much more straightforward. So I'm going to get started. I've made my slip knot, going to get started doing row 1, and we start with a standing double crochet, and we add a second double crochet into that same location. Then we start doing our clusters, so that means we are doing 3 double crochets in the same location. A double crochet is yarn over, insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And we do that 3 times in each location where we are going to be placing a cluster. I use American terminology. And of course I'm using different colors, but again, that's only for demonstration purposes. So, you know, you use whichever yarn you are using, obviously, but this is for, you know, clarity's sake. So I am now doing the last cluster before my stitch marker. Here is the location with the stitch marker. This is where I'm going to place a cluster of 2 double crochets. There we go. We are now replacing the stitch marker, and we're putting it on top of that stitch here. There we go. So now we have marked this cluster. Really, we're just putting this here so we don't forget about it in the next row, because you're very likely to just crochet over it. I mean, I did. And now you are going to continue doing your row 1, and row 1 is doing clusters, and then in the middle of your row you do 1 cluster with just the 2 double crochets, and make sure you replace your stitch marker. Now I have 14 clusters here. Obviously You could have more or less, but the main thing is that you have an even number of clusters. Again, I'm just using 14 as an example for my demonstration here. So at the end of the row, you are going to place a double crochet, and that is the end of your row. So now I am going to change color, but obviously you can just keep on using whatever yarn you are using, because obviously that's your pattern and that's what you will need to do. So now for row 2, we're just going to get started with a chain 2. You turn and you do your second double crochet, because this is how we always start our row, and then we start doing our clusters again. And when we get to the location for a cluster in front of the cluster with the stitch marker, that's where I will meet you. So I have now made it to the location in front of the cluster with the stitch marker. We're actually going to skip this location, but we are going to place our cluster in here. So we're going to remove the stitch marker, place your cluster in between those 2 double crochets from that cluster, go back to your stitch marker and place it on that cluster. So this time you are actually putting your stitch marker on the middle one here, because in a moment in row 3 we are going to move it again, and then we will be ready to do another decrease. Now that we have gotten to this stage, we are also going to skip this location here, and we're going to go straight to the next location for the next cluster. There we go. And we now continue all the way to the end of the row. And here we're going to place a double crochet on top of that first double crochet. Voila, that's the end of the row. So that was row 2 of tapering the sleeve. So let me cut off this yarn. Again, I'm changing color just so that I can show you in a moment which row is which very clearly. So I'm going to undo the last pull through my new color, and I'm going to chain 2, going to turn, and this is row 3. And row 3 is going to be a row just doing clusters. So let's get started the way we usually get started, with our chain 2 and turn and a double crochet. Then we do clusters in between the clusters of the row below. And this time we are just going to do a whole row of clusters, but we still do have to move the stitch marker. And you will see where this stitch marker is going to end up. And if you work with a stitch marker like this, it's so easy. It's such a lovely technique to do, and also of course to have under your belt, because you know, who doesn't need to taper a sleeve sometimes, right? And certainly with clusters it's not so straightforward, but this technique, oh my goodness. So as you can see, I've done the cluster in front of the cluster with the stitch marker, and now I'm going to do the cluster after the cluster with the stitch marker. Once you've done your both clusters, you're going to go to the stitch marker and you will just move it up to in between these clusters. And this actually brings it back to that first location that we did in the middle between the 2 clusters. And this now is the location for a row 1 again. So it's really easy to keep tapering. So of course don't taper too much, but the tapering is very light and you will hardly notice it, but it is happening. So for my sleeves I did 4 rounds of these 3 rows, and that tapered the sleeve so nicely you hardly even noticed it. So here we go. So let's have a count of our clusters. So the first row, the bluebell row here, has 14 clusters. Now this one here and this one make 1 cluster. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's the same amount of clusters as we started with. Then the pale rose row, again we're going to count. So these 2 here is 1 cluster. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that's 1 less. So this is where it happens. This is where you are going to reduce 1 cluster. Then the, what colour is this? The Cornish blue one. So these 2 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So we have 13 clusters. So the next row will have 13 clusters. Then the next row 2 will have 12 clusters, and so on. So this is how you will keep on repeating row 1, 2 and 3, and of course you've got your stitch marker ready to go here, so you can easily do your first row, second row, third row again because you've got your stitch marker already in place. You will need to make sure, of course, that you then look at your pattern or try on, if this is a sleeve, try it on and make sure that of course it is the width that you need. So depending on how wide you need it, you're going to have to do more or less repeats of row 1, 2 and 3. Once you have your width of your sleeve that you need, you will be able to just keep on doing row 3. So you can remove the stitch marker then and just keep doing row 3 without any decreasing. So I have now done 1, 2, 3 repeats of row 1, 2 and 3. And as you can see, the sides are going in slightly, of course, because we are missing stitches in the middle, and it is going curvy a little bit, but that's fine, and that's of course perfectly normal because we are reducing here. So although we're reducing in the middle, you will notice it on the sides, and of course if you then make this into a sleeve, nobody is going to notice that, and of course it's going to be tapered. That's what we want, isn't it? So there we go. So this is 3 repeats. I'm going to do a few more so you can see the result. And as you can see now, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4 repeats. I have now done 5 repeats of my rows 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And as you can see from the 14 clusters that we have here, we have reduced quite significantly to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 clusters. So we now have just about the width of a sleeve, so make sure you do the reduction as much as you need, and then make sure you then lengthen as long as you need as well. So now when you then fold this double and create the sleeve by joining these sides here, you will see that indeed from this width here we have now reduced to this width, and we have done this in a very gentle, tapered way. There's no sudden decreases happening, it's all very nice and tapered. So I do hope you will try this technique and that you will have it in your arsenal of techniques ready to use should you need it, because I think it's a lovely way to taper a sleeve. Certainly, of course, when you have clusters to deal with. So thank you very much for watching this video and for supporting my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one. Bye!